1 week before his 18th birthday, my grandson looked me in the eye and said, "The best birthday present you could give me is your death, so we can finally split the money." The very next morning, I dissolved the entire family estate, cut every relative out of my will, and vanished without a word. What I left on his desk tore the whole family apart. I'm glad you're here with me. Stay with my story until the very end and write in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has traveled. My name is Dolores, and I'm 66 years old. For the 5 years since Harold passed away, I truly believed I was building something beautiful with my family. I thought the love I gave them, the sacrifices I made, the money I poured into their lives were all investments in relationships that meant something. I was wrong. "You know what, Grandma? The best birthday gift you could give me would be if you just died already, so we could finally split the money." Those words came out of the mouth of my 17-year-old grandson, Axel, as he sprawled in my kitchen, eating cereal from a bowl that cost more than some people earn in a week. He said it so casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. His spoon tapped against the fine china, and the sound rang in my chest like a funeral bell. I was standing at the stove, making his favorite blueberry pancakes, convinced we were about to share a sweet little grandmother-grandson breakfast. The batter was perfectly whisked, the griddle warmed to the exact right temperature. Steam drifted up from the pan, carrying that familiar mix of vanilla and butter that usually wrapped our kitchen in comfort. But in that instant, everything went numb. My hand froze around the spatula. The pancake I was flipping flopped back into the pan with a wet smack. I felt something inside me fracture. Not like glass shattering, but like ice spreading slowly through my veins. For 66 years, I had lived with the belief that family meant something, that blood created unbreakable ties, that real love lived between people who shared your name and your history. "What did you just say?" I whispered, turning around slowly. Axel didn't even bother to look up from his phone. He kept scrolling, probably already dreaming about how much he'd inherit once I was gone. His dark hair fell across his forehead the same way his grandfather Harold's used to. But in his eyes, there was none of Harold's warmth, only cold calculation, a predator's focus. "Come on, Grandma, don't act all surprised. We all know you're getting old. Mom and Dad are always talking about how much money we'll have when you're gone. You've had a good run." The casual cruelty of it knocked the air out of my lungs. This was the child I had helped raise, the boy I had taken to baseball games, for whom I'd bought expensive cleats and paid private school tuition when his parents said they couldn't manage it. The same grandson who had once curled up in my lap, listening to stories about his grandfather, swearing he would always take care of his grandma when she got old. I slipped my hand into the pocket of my apron and felt the small digital recorder I always carry. It became a habit after Harold died, recording conversations with lawyers, doctors, anyone who might later claim I had misunderstood something. So widowhood had taught me to protect myself with proof. My fingers found the record button, and I pressed it without a sound. "Axel, sweetheart, that's a horrible thing to say. You don't really mean that," I said gently. He finally lifted his gaze, and what I saw in his face chilled me more than his words. Irritation. The kind of impatience you reserve for a slow server who's taking too long with your order. "Look, Grandma, let's be honest. You're 66. You've been sick a lot lately. Mom says you'll probably need a nursing home soon anyway, and that's just going to chew through all the money. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if you just went peacefully? Then me, Mom, and Dad could actually use the money for important stuff. I want to buy a Tesla when I turn 18 next week. Do you know how much those cost?" I knew exactly how much they cost. $60,000. I knew because he'd been dropping hints about wanting one for months, and I had actually been considering it as his 18th birthday present. The irony turned my stomach. "Important stuff," I repeated, my voice sounding empty even to my own ears. "And I suppose keeping your grandmother alive isn't important?" He shrugged, so nonchalant it felt like another slap to the face. "You've already lived your life. I'm just getting started. Besides, what are you doing with all that money anyway? You just sit in this big house all day. At least we'd do something fun with it." The pancakes were burning. I could smell them, but my body wouldn't respond. I just stood there, watching the young man I had loved without conditions reduce my entire life to a nuisance standing between him and a luxury car. "Your parents feel the same way?" I asked quietly. "Are you kidding? Dad's been looking up nursing homes for months. He found this place in Florida that's only like $3,000 a month. Mom says once you're there, you'll probably forget all about us anyway, so it's like a win-win." $3,000 a month. At that moment, I was giving that family $8,000 every month to cover their mortgage, their car payments, their credit card debt, and Axel's allowance. $8,000 drawn from the life insurance Harold left me, money meant to sustain me through my old age. I thought of Harold then, of how he used to sit in that very chair where Axel was now, reading me the morning paper over coffee, how he'd bring in wildflowers from the garden and tell me I was still as beautiful as the day he married me. He never could have imagined that the grandson who carried his name would one day sit in his place and wish for his wife's death. "Grandma, the pancakes are burning," Axel said, snapping me back into the present. I turned off the stove and stared at the charred pancakes, seeing them as a perfect picture of what was happening, something that had started warm and sweet, ruined by neglect and cruelty. I scraped the blackened pancakes into the garbage disposal, the grinding noise covering the sound of the tears starting to fall. When I turned around, Axel was already gone. His empty cereal bowl sat abandoned on the counter, and from the driveway I heard his car engine roar to life. He had gotten exactly what he came for: breakfast and the chance to tell his grandmother she should die for his convenience. Then he went on with his day as if nothing had happened. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the props of a life I had believed was filled with love. The expensive appliances I'd bought to create cozy family memories, the dining table where we had shared thousands of meals. The photos on the refrigerator showed birthdays, graduations, holidays, all the moments I had carefully captured, thinking they were proof of a real bond. But as I stared at them now, I began to see something I'd never allowed myself to notice before. In every single picture, I was the one leaning in. I was the one smiling the widest, hugging the tightest, giving the most. And everyone else just seemed to be performing, going through the motions for the camera. I walked to my bedroom and sank heavily onto the edge of the bed Harold and I had shared for 44 years. His pillow still held the faintest trace of his aftershave, even after 5 years. I pressed my face into it and finally allowed myself to cry, for the first time since his funeral. When the tears finally ran dry, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small leather journal. Since Harold's death, it had become my private record of everything. Not just financial details, but small observations about my family that had been gnawing at me. Patterns I had brushed aside, remarks that felt cruel, but that I had excused as jokes or misunderstandings. Now, reading my own handwriting, the truth that had been glaring at me for years became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a family, it was a business arrangement, and I was the asset, nothing more than the cash cow everyone was waiting to slaughter. I picked up my pen and added today's entry. Axel told me the best birthday present I could give him would be my death so they can split my money. He's 17 years old and already sees me as an ATM with an expiration date. As I wrote, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there, raw, stinging, but it was joined by something firmer, colder. If my family saw me only as a source of money, then maybe it was time to let them see what life looked like without that source. I closed the journal and went to the window, looking out over the garden Harold and I had planted together. The roses were in full bloom, red petals glowing against the green leaves. Harold used to say roses were proof that beautiful things could have thorns, that sometimes the loveliest flowers were the ones that could make you bleed if you handled them carelessly. Standing there, watching the roses sway in the afternoon breeze, I realized that perhaps it was time for this particular rose to show her thorns. If they were so eager for me to be gone, maybe they needed a taste of what that loss would truly mean. Not the money they were counting on, but the emptiness left behind when someone who has given everything finally stops giving. The digital recorder was still in my pocket, its red light blinking softly. Proof of what my grandson really thought of me. the first piece of a puzzle I had only just begun to assemble. But seeing the truth was only step one. What I chose to do with that truth would decide whether I spent the rest of my life as the victim of their greed, or as a woman who finally learned how to protect herself from the very people who were supposed to love her most. 3 days after Axel's brutal comment, I stumbled onto something that changed everything. What I discovered that Thursday evening wasn't just more evidence of their greed. It was proof of a calculated scheme that had been unfolding right under my nose. I had driven to Livia and Quentin's house to drop off some documents they needed for a mortgage refinancing, papers I was handling for them because they said they couldn't afford an attorney. The irony of that sat bitterly in my throat, knowing now they were simultaneously plotting my exit so they could grab money they believed I was hoarding. So their home was a modest 2-story colonial, the same one I'd helped them buy 8 years earlier with a $40,000 down payment. Their mortgage payments, insurance, and most of their monthly expenses came directly out of my checking account. Standing on their front porch with an envelope full of financial forms, it hit me that I was literally holding proof of just how completely I had been supporting them. I rang the doorbell. No answer. Livia's car was in the driveway, and the living room lights were on, so I knew they had to be home. I knocked again, then finally used the spare key they'd given me years ago for emergencies. Considering I practically paid for the house, I figured I qualified as one. The moment I stepped into the foyer, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Familiar voices, but with a tone I'd never heard from them before. Slow, tense, secretive. My daughter Livia, my son-in-law Quentin, and unmistakably my grandson Axel. I should have called out, announced that I was there. Instead, I froze. Something deep inside told me to stay silent and listen. Later, I would recognize it as self-preservation, finally waking up after years of deliberate blindness. The thing is, we need to be smart about this, Quentin was saying. He had that business-like tone he used for deals and negotiations, controlled, calculating. We can't just sit around hoping she dies on her own. She could live another 20 years and by then there'll be nothing left. Especially if she needs long-term care, Livia added. Do you have any idea what those places cost? We could lose everything. My heart stopped. They were talking about me as if I were an investment they needed to cash out before it depreciated. So what are you saying? Axel asked. I could hear the anticipation in his teenage voice, the same voice that used to call me the best grandma in the world. I'm saying we need to nudge her into making some changes, Quentin replied. Get her into assisted living sooner rather than later. Once she's in, we can get power of attorney. Claim she's not mentally capable of handling her own money. I pressed my back against the wall, covering my mouth to choke down a gasp. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were planning to strip me of my rights and drain my accounts while I was still breathing. How are we supposed to do that? Livia asked. She's sharp as a tack. Everyone knows it. Not everyone, Quentin said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. I've been keeping notes, little things. Times she forgot something or got dates mixed up. I've been building a file. What kind of file? Axel asked. Mostly medical records, Quentin said. I found out Dr. Peterson retired last year, so your grandma's been seeing a new doctor now, someone who doesn't know her history. I'd been going to appointments with her and subtly steering the conversations, mentioning that we were worried about her memory and her judgment. My blood turned to ice. Quentin had been sabotaging my medical care, carefully planting doubts about my mental state with a doctor who didn't know me well enough to see through the lies. That's brilliant, Livia breathed. How long before we can make it official? A few more months, maybe, Quentin replied. The key is to go slow. We can't rush it or it'll look suspicious. What about the money? Axel cut in. How much are we actually talking about? I held my breath, bracing myself to hear how they valued my life. Well, there's the house for starters, Quentin said. That's worth at least $500,000 now. Then you've got the investment accounts, savings, the life insurance Harold left her. Last time I checked, we're talking close to $3 million total. $3 million. They thought I was sitting on $3 million. The reality was that I had about $800,000 left. Everything else, Harold's life insurance, our retirement savings, the nest egg we'd built over 44 years of marriage, had already been poured into them. Private school for Axel, the down payment on this very house, their mortgage, their cars, their vacations, their emergencies, their medical bills, and 100 other expenses that had slowly bled my accounts dry. But I had never told them how much I'd actually spent. I hadn't wanted them to feel guilty for accepting my help, so they kept on believing I was hoarding a fortune that simply no longer existed. $3 million, Axel whistled. That's enough for my Tesla, plus college, plus whatever I want afterward. Don't forget we have bills too, Livia reminded him. Your dad and I are barely keeping up. This house, the cars, our credit cards, we need that money just as much as you do. There's enough for everyone, Quentin said smoothly. What matters is making sure we control it before she does something stupid with it. Like what? Livia asked. Like donating it to charity. Or deciding to travel around the world. Or worse, getting remarried. You know how lonely old women are. They fall for smooth-talking guys who just want their money. The irony was almost unbearable. They were afraid someone else might take advantage of me, while plotting to do exactly that themselves. So what's the timeline? Axel pushed. I'm thinking we start turning up the pressure after your birthday next week, Quentin replied. We'll begin hinting that it's not safe for her to live alone. Bring up a few times when she seemed confused or forgetful. Get her used to the idea that she needs more help than she admits. And then? Livia prompted. Then we help her pick a nice facility. Somewhere comfortable but not too pricey. We want to preserve as much of the estate as possible. What if she refuses? Axel asked. She won't have a choice once she's declared incompetent, Quentin said patiently, like he was giving a lecture in a conference room. Once we have power of attorney, we make every decision. Where she lives, how her money is used, everything. I had heard enough. More than enough. I crept back toward the front door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the lock and slipped outside. Sitting in my car in their driveway, I stared at the house I had helped them buy and tried to process what I'd just heard. This was not a worried family discussing my well-being. This was a carefully planned scheme to strip me of my freedom, drain what remained of my savings, and tuck me away in some cheap facility while they enjoyed the rewards of my labor. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the cold, methodical way they talked about dismantling my life. No emotion. No shame, no hesitation. They discussed having me declared incompetent the same way someone might compare interest rates or choose a vacation package. I thought back to Axel's comment 3 days earlier that the best birthday present would be my death. Now I understood that my death would actually be inconvenient for them. They needed me alive, just powerless. A milk cow they could keep draining until there was nothing left. Driving home through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where I'd lived for 23 years, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The grief and shock from Axel's words were still there, but they were now fused with something harsher, sharper, clarity. For the first time in years, I was seeing my family clearly, not through the soft filter of love, hope, and denial, but with the hard focus of someone who had finally stopped inventing excuses for unforgivable behavior. They believed I was a naive, aging woman who could be easily handled. They believed I was so hungry for their attention that I would never question their motives or defend myself from their plans. They believed I was weak, vulnerable, and foolish. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Back at my house, I went straight to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my most important documents. Behind my birth certificate and social security card was something I had prayed I would never have to use. A second will. I had drafted it and had it notarized 5 years earlier, right after Harold died. In one of those anxious spells where I wanted to make sure everything was in order, this will was nothing like the one my family knew about. The official will, the one filed by my attorney, left everything to Livia and, through her, to Axel. But this second document, this quiet little insurance policy I had created in a moment of widow's caution, named a very different set of beneficiaries. I took out the sealed envelope and held it in my shaking hands. Inside was a piece of paper that could change everything, a piece of paper that represented a decision I had hoped I would never have to make. After what I'd overheard tonight, I realized it wasn't truly a decision anymore. It was self-defense. I opened my journal and wrote, "They think I have $3 million. They have no idea I've already spent most of it on them. They're planning to have me declared incompetent and take whatever's left. They think I'm weak, confused, and easy to control." I hesitated for a moment, pen hovering over the page, then added, "They're wrong about everything, and they're about to find out just how wrong." Tomorrow was Friday. Next week, Axel would turn 18 and be expecting his $50,000 birthday gift. The week after that, they planned to kick off their campaign to have me declared incompetent and locked away. But now I had my own plans they couldn't even begin to imagine and wouldn't recognize until it was far too late to stop them. They wanted to treat me like a clueless old woman who didn't understand what was happening around her. Maybe it was time to show them exactly how much this clueless old woman had been noticing all along. The morning after I uncovered my family's scheme, I woke up oddly calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering whether I was being too sensitive or misreading their behavior. I had heard the truth with my own ears, captured it on my digital recorder, and now I knew exactly where I stood. I was no longer their cherished mother and grandmother. I was their target. What they didn't realize was that their target had been watching them far longer than they had been watching me. While they thought they were being clever with their little plans, I had been quietly chronicling their behavior in my journal for months. Every cutting remark dismissed as a joke, every demand for money framed as an emergency, every manipulative gesture disguised as concern for my well-being. I had simply been too afraid to accept what the evidence was telling me. Now I was ready to run my own experiment. I started with Livia. My daughter called that Friday morning, as she did every week, supposedly to check on me, but really to audit my finances. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Her voice had that sugary, overbright tone she reserved for moments when she wanted something. "Actually, I'm a little worried," I said, settling into Harold's old chair with my coffee. "I met with my financial advisor yesterday and he told me something concerning." Of course, there had been no such meeting, but I wanted to see how fast news would travel through the family grapevine. "What do you mean, concerning?" Livia's voice sharpened immediately. "Well, you know how I've been helping you and Quentin with the mortgage and the other bills?" I paused, letting the question hang. It turns out I may have been a bit more generous than I should have been. "What do you mean?" Now she sounded genuinely alarmed. "My advisor says that at the rate I'm spending, I might need to cut back significantly. He's worried about my long-term security." There was a long stretch of silence on the line. When Livia finally spoke, her tone was tight and controlled. "How much of a cutback are we talking about?" Not, "Are you okay, Mom?" Not, "What can we do to help?" Just straight to, "How is this going to affect us?" He suggested I reduce the monthly support I send you from $8,000 down to maybe $2,000, at least until I get a better handle on things. $2,000? Livia's voice shot up in pitch. "Mom, that won't even cover our mortgage. We depend on that money." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry," I said gently. "But I have to think about my own future, too. What if I need long-term care someday? Those facilities are so expensive." "You don't need to worry about that," Livia said quickly. "If something happens, we'll take care of you. You don't need to hoard money for some nursing home." Hoard money. As if wanting enough to safely care for myself in old age was some kind of selfish greed. "I hope you're right, honey," I replied. "But my advisor says I should be more cautious. He even suggested I consider downsizing, maybe selling this house and moving somewhere smaller, more manageable." "Sell the house?" Livia's reaction was instant and sharp. "Mom, you can't do that. That house has so much sentimental value. Dad made that garden for you. All your memories are there." Interesting how the sentimental value suddenly became crucial the moment the house might be sold instead of inherited. "I know it would be hard," I said with a sigh, "but if I sold it, I could invest the money and have a steady income. Maybe I could even increase the help I give you in Axel." I could practically hear her calculating a big, immediate payout from a house sale versus the monthly payments she already relied on. "Let me talk to Quentin," she said at last. "Maybe we can figure out some other options. You shouldn't have to make big decisions like this on your own." "That's very kind of you, dear. I was hoping you'd say that. Families should stick together, shouldn't we?" After we hung up, I leaned back and started the stopwatch on my phone. I wanted to measure exactly how long it would take for my invented financial crisis to circle back to me. It took 3 hours and 17 minutes. Quentin called first, sounding calm and professionally sympathetic, the voice he used with difficult clients. "Dolores, I heard from Livia that you're having some financial concerns," he began. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd be happy to review your portfolio. Sometimes financial advisors try to frighten older clients into making changes they don't really need." "That's very kind of you, Quentin," I replied, "but I'm not sure I'm ready to share all of that yet. It feels very personal." Of course, he soothed. "But if you're worried about long-term care costs, there may be strategies we can use. Ways to protect your assets while still making sure you get the care you need." Protect my assets. He meant hide my money so I could qualify for government assistance while preserving their inheritance. "What kind of strategies?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "Well," he said, easing into his pitch, "sometimes it makes sense to transfer assets to family members early." I paused, my pen hovering over the page, then added, "They're wrong about everything, and they're about to find out just how wrong." Tomorrow was Friday. Next week, Axel would turn 18 and be expecting his $50,000 birthday gift. The week after that, they planned to start their little campaign to have me declared incompetent and locked away. But now I had my own strategy, one they couldn't even imagine and wouldn't recognize until it was far too late to stop. They wanted to treat me like some confused old woman who didn't understand what was happening around her. Maybe it was finally time to show them exactly how much this confused old woman had been understanding all along. The morning after I uncovered my family's conspiracy, I woke up feeling strangely calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't second-guessing myself, wondering if I was overreacting or taking things the wrong way. I had heard their plans with my own ears, recorded every word on my little digital device, and now I knew exactly where I stood. I wasn't their beloved mother and grandmother. I was their target. What they didn't realize was that their target had been watching them far longer than they had been watching me. While they believed they were being clever, I had been quietly documenting their behavior in my journal for months, every cutting remark brushed off as a joke, every financial demand disguised as a temporary emergency, every manipulative gesture wrapped in fake concern for my well-being. I had just been too afraid to accept what those patterns really meant. Now I was ready to run an experiment of my own. I started with Livia. My daughter called that Friday morning, just as she always did, calling it checking in on me, when it was really more like checking in on my bank account. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Her voice had that syrupy sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Actually, I'm a bit worried," I said, settling into Harold's old chair with my coffee. "I met with my financial advisor yesterday, and he told me something rather unsettling." Of course, there had been no such meeting. But I wanted to see how quickly news would travel through the family once money was involved. "What do you mean, unsettling?" Livia's tone sharpened instantly. "Well, you know how I've been helping you and Quentin with the mortgage and other expenses." I paused, letting the weight of that hang for a moment. It turns out I may have been a little more generous than I should have. "What are you talking about?" Now she sounded genuinely anxious. "My advisor says that at the rate I've been spending, I may need to cut back quite a bit. He's worried about my long-term financial security." There was a long stretch of silence on the other end. When Livia finally spoke, her voice was tightly controlled. "How much of a cutback are we talking about? Not, are you okay? Not, do you need help? Just straight to, what does this mean for us?" "He suggested I reduce what I send you each month from $8,000 down to maybe $2,000, at least until I have a better handle on things." $2,000? Livia's voice jumped up an octave. Mom, that won't even cover our mortgage. We depend on that money. I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry, I said softly, but I have to think about my own future too. What if I need long-term care someday? Those places are very expensive. You don't need to worry about that, Livia said quickly. If something happens, we'll take care of you. You don't have to hoard money for some nursing home. Hoard money. As if wanting enough to look after myself were greedy, while expecting me to fund their lifestyle was somehow noble. I hope you're right, honey, I replied, but my advisor thinks I should be more cautious. He even suggested I think about downsizing, maybe selling this house and moving somewhere smaller, easier to manage. Selling the house? Livia's reaction was immediate and sharp. Mom, you can't do that. That house has so much sentimental value. Dad planted that garden for you. All your memories are there. Funny how sentimental value always appears when an asset might be liquidated instead of inherited. I know it would be hard, I said with a sigh, but if I sold it, I could invest the money and have a steady income. Maybe I could even increase the help I give you and Axel. I could almost hear her mental calculator whirring, a big lump sum from selling the house versus the monthly deposits she was already used to. Let me talk to Quentin, she said at last. Maybe we can find some alternatives. You shouldn't have to make big decisions like that by yourself. That's very kind of you, dear. I was hoping you'd say that. Family should stick together, shouldn't it? After we hung up, I leaned back and started the stopwatch on my phone. I wanted to see how long it would take for my completely fabricated financial crisis to circle the family and come back to me. It took exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. Quentin called first, sounding smooth and professionally sympathetic, the tone he used with demanding clients. Dolores, I heard from Livia that you're facing some financial concerns, he began. If you'd like, I'd be happy to review your portfolio. Sometimes advisors try to scare older clients into making changes they don't actually need. That's very kind of you, Quentin, I said. But I'm not sure I'm ready to share everything just yet. It feels very personal. Of course, he said smoothly. But if you're worried about long-term care costs, there might be some strategies we can use, ways to protect your assets and still make sure you get the care you need. Protect my assets, meaning move them out of my name so the government pays my bills while my family pockets what's left. What kind of strategies? I asked, playing innocent. Well, he began, easing into his sales pitch. Sometimes it's smart to transfer assets to family members ahead of time. That way, they're not counted when determining eligibility for certain programs. It's completely legal, and it keeps the money in the family, where it belongs. Where it belongs. As if the money Harold and I worked for somehow naturally belonged to them instead of me. That sounds complicated, I said. And wouldn't that mean I'd be giving up control of my own money? Not necessarily. We could set up a trust, make sure you still have access to what you need while protecting the rest. I know some excellent lawyers who specialize in elder care planning. I'll bet you do, I thought. Lawyers who'd help you strip me of everything without breaking a single law. Let me think about it, I said softly. All of this feels very overwhelming. Of course. But, Dolores, please don't make any big decisions without talking to us first. We care about you, and we don't want you getting taken advantage of by people who don't have your best interests at heart. The irony was so thick I could hardly swallow. 2 hours later, Axel called, my 17-year-old grandson, who had told me a week earlier that the best gift I could give him was my death, was now suddenly worried about my money problems. Grandma, Mom said you're having financial issues. Are you okay? I don't know if I'd call them issues exactly, I answered. I just need to be more careful with my spending. Does this mean you won't be able to give me the $50,000 for my birthday? There it was. No easing into it, no real concern. Just straight to the point. Would this affect his payday? I don't know yet, sweetheart. $50,000 is a lot of money. Maybe we could find a smaller gift that would still make you happy. The silence on the line dragged on so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. But you promised, he said finally, his voice dripping with sulky resentment. I've been counting on that money. I already picked out the car I want. I know, and I'm sorry, but sometimes circumstances change. Maybe instead of a car, we could look at something more practical. A good laptop for college or some clothes? A laptop? His voice jumped in outrage. Grandma, everyone my age has a laptop. I don't need another laptop. I need a car. Need? I repeated. Axel, you already have a car. The Honda I bought you last year. That piece of junk? It's embarrassing. All my friends have nice cars. I can't show up to college in a Honda Civic. The same Honda Civic that cost me $22,000, now reduced to a piece of junk because it didn't adequately advertise his status. Honey, there are kids your age who would be grateful just to have any car, I said gently. Yeah, well, I'm not other people. I'm your grandson. You're supposed to want good things for me. The entitlement took my breath away. In his mind, my love was measured in dollar signs. If I couldn't buy him a Tesla, then clearly I didn't care enough. I do want good things for you, I said quietly. But maybe we don't agree on what good really means. Whatever, he muttered. I guess I'll just have to figure something else out. After he hung up, I sat in Harold's chair for a long time, replaying all 3 conversations in my mind. My imaginary financial crisis had told me everything I needed to know. Not one of them had asked if I was scared, or offered to help, or even suggested cutting back their own spending. Their only concern was how my supposed money problems would interfere with their access to my very real money. And the most revealing part? How quickly they had all jumped to the same solution. I should hand over control of my assets, for my own protection, of course. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. That evening, I called my actual financial advisor, Martin Henderson. He had been managing Harold's and my investments for 12 years and was one of the few people who knew the real state of my accounts. Dolores, he said warmly when his assistant put me through. How are you? I haven't heard from you since our review last month. I'm hanging in there, Martin, I replied, but I have a question. If I wanted to make some major changes to my estate plan, what would that involve? What kind of changes are we talking about? He asked. Adjusting the amounts, or... Let's say I wanted to remove my current beneficiaries and name new ones, I said. How fast could that be done? He went quiet for a moment. Martin knew a lot about my situation, and he knew how much I'd been propping up Livia and Quentin financially. Is everything okay, Dolores? He asked gently. Things are becoming very clear, I said, which isn't the same as being okay, but it's a start. Well, he said thoughtfully, changes like that can be made fairly quickly, as long as you're certain about what you want. Are you certain? I thought about Axel wishing I were dead. I thought about the hushed voices in that kitchen, planning my legal destruction. I thought about 3 phone calls in a single day that confirmed my worst fears. I'm certain, I said. When can we meet? How does Monday at 10 sound? Perfect. And Martin, please prepare several different options. I may be making some very significant changes. After we hung up, I walked slowly through my house, seeing it through a different lens. This house Livia was so desperate for me not to sell. The house where Harold and I had built a life, raised our daughter, dreamed of grandkids who would love us for more than our bank account. It was still a lovely home full of beautiful memories, but it was also a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. Harold was gone, and the family we thought we'd built together? That family had turned out to be an illusion, sustained by my monthly transfers and nothing more. Maybe it was time to stop living in a mausoleum to the past and start using what time and resources I had left to build something real. Back in my bedroom, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today I tested them. They failed completely. But they don't see me as a person, with my own needs, fears, and rights. They see me as a resource to be managed and, eventually, consumed. The test is over. Now it's time for the results." Outside my window, the garden Harold and I had planted together was in full bloom. Roses, daisies, hollyhocks, all the flowers we'd chosen because they return year after year, creating beauty that lasts. But even the loveliest garden needs tending. And sometimes, tending means ripping out the weeds that are strangling everything else. Tomorrow was Saturday. Axel's birthday party was the following Friday. By then, every one of my pieces needed to be in position, because if my family wanted to treat me like some naive old woman who could be easily handled, I planned to show them exactly how naive I really was. By Monday morning, I had all the necessary appointments booked. Martin Henderson, my financial advisor, Robert Chen, my estate attorney, Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist Martin recommended. Each of them received copies of my digital recordings, my journal entries, and a detailed timeline of my family's behavior over the last 6 months. I wasn't just shielding myself anymore, I was constructing an airtight case. By Tuesday, the changes to my will were signed and executed. By Wednesday, the asset transfers had begun. By Thursday, exactly 1 week after I'd overheard that horrifying conversation in my daughter's kitchen, everything was in place. Friday dawned crisp and bright. Axel's 18th birthday, the day he expected to walk away with $50,000, and instead would find out what happens when you wish for your grandmother's death. I had invited the whole family over for dinner to celebrate his big milestone. Livia had been delighted, likely assuming it meant I was feeling generous again despite my supposed money troubles. Quentin offered to pick up a fancy cake from the expensive bakery downtown. Axel had been moody but compliant, clearly convinced his Tesla down payment was waiting at the end of the night. They showed up at 6 on the dot, all smiles and fake warmth. Livia handed me a bouquet of grocery store chrysanthemums, maybe $12 worth, like it was a grand gesture. Quentin carried the overpriced cake as if it proved his generosity. Axel wore a brand new shirt I had probably financed through his allowance. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, hugging my grandson. He felt stiff, impatient, already focused on getting through dinner and straight to the presents. We made small talk over pot roast, his favorite, served with mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden Harold and I had planted. The conversation felt forced, theatrical. Everyone was playing their assigned role in this family drama, but underneath it all, the tension thrummed like a live wire. Finally, as I began serving the cake, Livia voiced what they were all wondering. "So, Mom, how did your meeting with the financial advisor go this week? Are things looking any better?" "Actually," I said, slicing neat portions of chocolate cake, "things are much clearer now. I've made some important decisions about my finances." Quentin leaned in, interest sharpening his features. "What kind of decisions?" I set the knife down and looked at the 3 people who had spent the past week plotting to strip me of my freedom and my savings. Well, I realized Martin, my advisor, was absolutely right about one thing. I have been far too careless with my money. "We told you we'd help you come up with a better plan," Livia jumped in quickly. "You don't have to deal with this alone." "That's very generous of you," I said calmly, "but I've already dealt with it. I've made some substantial changes to protect my assets and secure my future." Axel finally glanced up from his plate, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What kind of changes?" "Well, for starters, I've moved most of my liquid assets into a trust that can only be used for my medical care and my basic living expenses. It's completely protected now." The silence that fell over the table was almost physical. I went on cutting cake as if we were discussing the weather. "I've also arranged for my ongoing care. If I ever become unable to manage my affairs, a professional guardian service will step in. I'll never have to worry about being taken advantage of by people who might not have my best interests at heart." Quentin's fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto his plate. "Dolores, that seems a little extreme," he said. "Family should take care of family." "I couldn't agree more," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "Family should take care of family. They should protect each other. They should never, ever conspire to rob each other." The air in the room felt suddenly 10 degrees colder. Livia's face drained of color. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I reached into the pocket of my sweater and took out my small digital recorder. I set it on the table beside the birthday cake, the metal glinting under the chandelier. "I'm talking about the conversation you had last Thursday night," I said evenly. "The one where you discussed having me declared mentally incompetent so you could take my money. The one where you planned to stash me in some cheap facility while you lived off my life savings. Axel's jaw dropped. Quentin opened his mouth to speak, but I lifted my hand to stop him. Please, let me finish. I've been very patient listening to all of you plot. Now it's your turn to listen. I pressed play. Quentin's voice filled the dining room, clear, calm, and damning. I'm saying we need to encourage her to make some changes. Get her to move into assisted living sooner rather than later. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney. Claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances. I let the recording run for about 30 seconds before stopping it. The whole thing is 27 minutes long, I said conversationally. That's how long you spent discussing the best way to dismantle my life. Very thorough, very detailed, very recorded. Livia stared at the recorder like it might bite her. Mom, you don't understand. We were just worried about you. Worried about me? I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made all three of them flinch. Let me play you another part. I skipped ahead and pressed play again, this time to Axel's voice. 3 million. That's enough for my Tesla plus college, plus whatever I want after that. Axel went pale. Grandma, I didn't mean— Oh, but you did, I cut in. You meant every word. I cut him off. Just like you meant it when you told me the best birthday present I could give you was my death, so you could split the money. Yes, Axel. I recorded that conversation too. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it next to the recorder. In here, I said, are copies of all my recordings, my journal entries documenting your behavior over the past year, and statements from 3 medical professionals confirming that I am of completely sound mind. It also contains copies of the new legal documents I've signed this week. Quentin found his voice first, though it came out in a hoarse whisper. What kind of legal documents? A new will, for starters, I replied. The old one left everything to Livia and Axel. This one has entirely different beneficiaries. Who? Livia's voice was barely more than a breath. The American Cancer Society, the local food bank, the children's hospital where I used to volunteer, I said evenly. Organizations that actually help people instead of exploiting them. Axel shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly across the hardwood floor. You can't do that. That money is supposed to be ours. Actually, I said, still seated with my hands calmly folded, that money is mine. I earned it. I saved it. Why, and I can leave it to anyone I choose. But we're your family, Livia choked out. Are you? I asked quietly. Because family members don't usually conspire to steal from each other. Family members don't wish for each other's deaths. Family members don't try to have their elders declared incompetent and locked away. We would never have actually done it, Quentin said quickly. We were just discussing options. For 27 minutes, I replied, in great detail, including specific timelines and methods. I picked up the recorder. Would you like to hear the part where you compare nursing homes and decide which ones are cheapest? This is insane, Axel snapped, his voice rising. You're punishing us for having a private conversation. A private conversation, I repeated, about dismantling my life and stealing my money. Yes, Axel, I suppose I am punishing you for that. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling oddly steady despite the chaos. There's more, I said. I've also arranged for my monthly support payments to stop immediately. The $8,000 I've been sending you every month. That ends today. Livia gasped. Mom, we can't afford— You'll figure it out, I said calmly. You're both capable adults. You managed before I started writing those checks, and you can manage again. You're destroying this family, Quentin said, his polished composure finally cracking. No, I replied firmly. You destroyed this family when you decided to treat me as nothing more than a bank account. When you taught your son that his grandmother's death would be a birthday gift. When you plotted to strip me of my independence and dignity. I walked to the window and looked out at Harold's garden, where the roses were still blooming despite the hint of autumn in the air. I loved you, I said quietly, not turning around. All of you. I would have given you anything you truly needed, stood by you through any crisis, been there no matter what. All I ever wanted in return was basic respect and decency. "Mom, please," Livia was sobbing now. "We can fix this. We can start over." I turned back to face them, and something settled inside me. Something that felt very much like peace. "No," I said, "we can't. Because this isn't a misunderstanding or a moment of weakness. This is who you are, who you've always been. I just finally stopped making excuses for you." Axel stared at me with something close to hatred. "So that's it? You're just going to cut us off completely?" "You cut yourselves off," I answered. "The moment you decided I was worth more to you, dead than alive." I walked to the front door and opened it. Cool evening air spilled into the house. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said. "Take your cake with you. I won't be needing it." They drifted toward the door in stunned silence, Quentin clutching the expensive cake like a misplaced prop. Livia stopped on the threshold, tears streaking her face. "Mom, this isn't how families are supposed to work." "You're right," I said softly. "Families are supposed to love and protect each other. They're supposed to value the time they have together. They're supposed to see each other as precious, not as obstacles or assets." I started to close the door, then paused and looked past her. "Happy birthday, Axel," I called to my grandson, standing beside his father's car with his fists clenched. "I hope you got everything you deserved tonight." As their car pulled away from the curb, I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly very tired. It was done. After 66 years of believing that family was everything, I had finally learned to put myself first. The house felt different now, quieter, but not empty, clearer, like something toxic had finally been aired out. I walked back into the dining room and gazed at the table still set for 4, the half-eaten cake, the recorder resting beside the cheap grocery store flowers, the full extent of their gratitude for everything I had sacrificed. Tomorrow, I would begin figuring out what my life looked like without them. Tonight, I would sit in Harold's chair and remember what it felt like to be loved by someone who saw me as more than an ATM with an expiration date. But first, I had one more call to make. I picked up my phone and dialed Martin Henderson. "Martin, it's Dolores. Yes, I know it's late. I just wanted you to know the family meeting went exactly as expected. You can go ahead with the final transfers we discussed." When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of their expectations, their endless needs, their constant emotional manipulation, it was finally gone. I was free, and it felt like the one gift they had never thought to give me: unconditional love and acceptance, starting with my own. The silence lasted exactly 48 hours. Saturday and Sunday passed in blissful quiet. No calls, no surprise visits, no guilt-soaked messages. For the first time in years, I woke without dread pressing against my ribs. I made coffee for one, read the newspaper in peace, and tended Harold's garden without anyone scolding me for doing too much at my age. It was the most peaceful weekend I'd had since Harold died, but Monday morning brought the storm I knew was coming. The first call came at 7:15 a.m. while I was watering the roses. Livia's name flashed on my screen, and I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, she called again. And again. By 8 a.m., she had called 12 times. I finally picked up on the 13th call. "Mom, thank God," Livia blurted, her voice frantic and raw. "We need to talk. This whole thing is a misunderstanding." "What part exactly is the misunderstanding?" I asked, settling into Harold's chair with my coffee. "The part where you plan to have me declared mentally incompetent, or the part where you tried to take my money?" "We weren't going to steal anything," she insisted, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked. "From having control over my own life?" "Mom, you don't understand how vulnerable you are," she said. "There are people out there who prey on elderly women. We were just trying to make sure that didn't happen to you." The irony was almost laughable. "You mean people like you?" I asked quietly. "That's not fair," she protested. "We're your family. Everything we did was out of love." "Love?" I echoed. Is that what you call it when your 17-year-old son tells his grandmother that her death would be the best birthday gift she could give him? Axel is just a kid, she said quickly. He doesn't understand what he's saying. He understood well enough to calculate how much he'd inherit, I replied. He understood well enough to pick out the Tesla he wanted to buy with the money he'd get from my death. The silence between us swelled, thick with all the ugly truths we couldn't unsay. "Mom, please," Livia whispered, "don't destroy our family over this." "I'm not destroying anything," I said, my voice calm. "I'm just finally recognizing what was already destroyed." After I hung up, I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down to check my voicemails. There were 17 of them, Livia begging, and Quentin trying to sound rational and professional, Axel unsurprisingly saying nothing at all. But it was the 18th message that made me sit up straighter, a voice I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Dolores Patterson, this is Amanda Morrison from Elder Care Advocacy Services. We've received some concerning reports about your welfare, and we'd like to schedule a wellness check at your earliest convenience." My blood ran cold. They hadn't wasted any time. I called Martin Henderson immediately. "Dolores," he answered on the first ring. "I've been expecting your call. You've had some interesting visitors reach out this morning, haven't you?" "How did you know?" I asked. "Because they called me first," he said. "Your son-in-law wanted to know if there was any way to contest the changes to your estate. He sounded very concerned about your mental state." "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I've worked with you for 12 years, that you are as sharp as ever, and that any attempt to question your competency would be met with the full documentation we've prepared, including the recordings." Some of the tension eased from my shoulders. "And this elder care advocacy thing?" I asked. "Standard procedure when someone files a concern," he said. "Don't worry, Dr. Williams is expecting their call. She's ready to conduct any competency evaluation they request. Dr. Patricia Williams, the geriatric psychiatrist Martin had recommended. We'd spent 2 hours together on Wednesday. She'd done a full mental status exam and concluded that I was not only competent, but remarkably well-adjusted for someone dealing with family exploitation. "How long is this going to go on?" I asked. "Until they realize they have no legal standing and no chance of success," Martin replied. "Your documentation is airtight, Dolores. They can't prove you're incompetent because you're not, and they can't challenge your right to change your will because it's your money." After I hung up with Martin, I decided I needed to get out of the house, away from the phone, away from the echoes of Friday night. I ended up at the cemetery where Harold was buried, a place I hadn't visited since the anniversary of his death 6 months earlier. His headstone was simple granite, with his name, his dates, and the inscription we'd chosen together, "Beloved husband and father." I sat on the small bench beside it and told him everything that had happened. "You would have been so disappointed in them," I said softly into the quiet. "Especially Axel. You had such high hopes for him." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree shading his grave, and my mind drifted back to the young man I'd married 50 years earlier, 21 years old, working construction by day and going to night school, with calloused hands, big dreams, and a fierce protectiveness that never once felt like control. "You always said family was everything," I went on. "But you meant real family, people who choose to love each other, not just people who happen to share DNA." When I pulled into my driveway later, 3 cars were already there: Livia's Honda, Quentin's BMW, and a small silver sedan I didn't recognize. Through the living room window, I could see figures sitting on my front porch. I parked in the garage and slipped in through the kitchen, hoping to avoid an immediate confrontation. But before I could even set down my purse, the doorbell started ringing, and ringing, and ringing. At last, I opened the door. Standing there were my daughter, my son-in-law, my grandson, and a well-dressed woman in her 40s holding a clipboard, wearing the kind of polished, sympathetic expression social workers perfect. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Amanda Morrison from Elder Care Advocacy Services," she said. "These are your family members, I believe. We're here to conduct a welfare check. Your family has expressed some concerns about your recent behavior and decision-making capacity." I looked past her to where Livia, Quentin, and Axel were huddled together like co-defendants. Livia's eyes were swollen from crying. Quentin looked like he was working through a complicated negotiation. Axel just looked angry and sullen. "What kind of concerns?" I asked. I asked Amanda Morrison, "What kind of concerns?" "They've reported that you've been making erratic financial decisions," she said, glancing at her clipboard, "that you've become paranoid and suspicious of family members who are trying to help you, and that you may be suffering from some form of dementia or age-related cognitive decline." I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Please come in, all of you." We gathered in my living room like two opposing sides at a negotiation table. Amanda sat in the middle in an armchair, clipboard poised, while my family clustered together on the couch across from Harold's chair, where I settled myself, hands folded calmly in my lap. "Mrs. Patterson," Amanda began, "your family is concerned that you've recently made some significant changes to your estate planning and financial arrangements. Can you tell me about that?" "Of course," I said. "I discovered my family was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of my money and put me in a nursing home. So I took steps to protect myself." Amanda's pen froze over the paper. "That's a very serious accusation." "Yes," I agreed. "It is. Would you like to hear the recordings?" I reached for my purse, but Quentin jumped in. "You see?" he said, sounding exasperated. "This is exactly what we're talking about. She's become obsessed with these so-called recordings. She thinks we're all plotting against her." "I don't think you're plotting against me," I replied evenly. "I know you are." "Because I heard you." I placed my digital recorder on the coffee table. "Ms. Morrison, would you like to hear exactly what my family said about me when they thought I couldn't hear them?" Amanda looked uneasy. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm not sure that's—" "Please," I interrupted gently. "I insist. They're the ones who called you because they're worried about my mental state. I think you deserve to hear what they really think of me." I pressed play. Quentin's voice poured into the room. "Once she's there, we can get power of attorney, claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances." Amanda's eyes widened. I skipped ahead and let another portion play. "The key is to be gradual about it. We can't rush this process, or it'll look suspicious." By the time I reached Axel's voice casually discussing how much money he'd have after I died, the room had gone utterly silent, except for the steady, damning stream of their own words. Amanda looked from the recorder to my family, back to me. "Mrs. Patterson, how long have you been aware of these discussions?" "I've been tracking concerning behavior for months," I said, "but I overheard this particular conversation last Thursday evening, the day before I changed my will." "You changed your will in response to this?" she asked. "I protected myself in response to this," I corrected. "Wouldn't you?" Amanda turned to Livia. "Ma'am, is this recording accurate?" Livia's face burned red with a mix of shame and anger. "It's completely out of context," she protested. "We were just talking about what would happen if Mom needed care. Every family has these conversations." "Do they?" Amanda asked coolly. "Do most families talk about having an elderly relative declared incompetent and placing her in the cheapest facility?" "We would never actually do that," Quentin said quickly. "We were just exploring options." "For 27 minutes, I added, with very specific timelines and strategies. Amanda jotted a few more notes, then turned back to me. "Mrs. Patterson, can you explain the financial changes you've made?" "I moved most of my assets into a protected trust that can only be used for my care," I said. "I appointed a professional guardian service to manage my affairs if I'm ever unable to do so myself, and I changed my will so that my estate now goes to charitable organizations instead of to people who see me as an obstacle to their inheritance." "And you made these decisions voluntarily, without pressure or coercion?" "Entirely voluntarily," I said. "In fact, I made them specifically to avoid pressure and coercion." Amanda spent another 20 minutes asking about my daily routines, my medications, my social activities. I answered every question clearly and precisely, sometimes checking my journal for exact dates or details. Finally, she closed her clipboard and stood. "Mrs. Patterson, Based on this interview, I see no evidence of cognitive decline, dementia, or impaired decision-making. You appear to be a competent adult who has made rational decisions to protect herself from family members who were, frankly, planning to exploit her." Livia jumped to her feet. "This is ridiculous. You're just going to take her word for everything?" "I'm going to take the evidence," Amanda replied firmly, "including the recordings of your family planning to defraud an elderly relative. Mrs. Patterson, would you like me to file a report regarding these threats?" I thought about it, studying the three people who had once been the center of my universe. They looked terrified now, cornered, stripped of their script. "No," I said at last, "I don't want to press charges. I just want them to leave me alone." Amanda nodded. "I'll note that in my report, but I must advise you, if this behavior continues, if there are further attempts to harass or intimidate you, you should contact law enforcement immediately." After Amanda left, my family and I remained facing one another across the living room that had once held birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and easy Sunday afternoons. "Are you happy now?" Axel demanded, his voice bitter. "You've turned everyone against us." "I didn't turn anyone against you," I replied. I just stopped pretending that what you were doing was acceptable." "This isn't over," Quentin said, his polished manner gone. "You can't just cut off your own family." "Watch me," I said. They walked out without another word. I locked the door behind them, then went to Harold's chair, sat down, and finally let myself cry. Not from heartbreak, but from relief. The worst was over. They'd played their last card, and they'd lost. Now I could begin the rest of my life. But first, I had one more recording to make. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Robert, it's Dolores. I'd like to add a corollary clause to my will," I said. "If anyone in my family challenges the estate or tries to have me declared incompetent, they forfeit any right to contest the charitable bequests. I want it to be very clear that fighting me will only make things worse for them." "Consider it done," he replied. "Dolores, are you all right?" I looked around my quiet home, the photos of Harold and me, the view of the garden through the window, the roses blooming without anyone telling me I was too old to tend them. "I'm perfect," I said, and for the first time in years, it was the absolute truth. 7 months later, I stood in my new kitchen, making coffee for two. Morning light streamed in through windows that faced east instead of west, filling a space that was smaller than my old house, and yet somehow felt infinitely bigger. I had sold the family home 3 weeks after the confrontation, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to be free. Every room in that house was haunted, not only by the memories of people who had never truly loved me, but by the ghost of the woman I used to be, the one who confused financial sacrifice with maternal duty. My new place was a cozy 2-bedroom cottage in a retirement community called Willowbrook Gardens. It wasn't anything like the cold institutional facilities my family had researched for me. It was a lively neighborhood of independent seniors who had chosen to live near one another for companionship and safety, not because they needed to be supervised. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock, just as it did every Tuesday. "Good morning, sunshine," called Margaret Winters as she let herself in with the spare key I'd given her. Margaret was 72, a retired school teacher who lived 3 houses down and had become my closest friend in this new chapter of my life. "Morning, Maggie," I called back, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs I'd picked up at a local pottery shop. "Ready for our adventure?" We had started taking day trips about 6 weeks after I moved in. Today's plan was to drive to a small town 90 minutes away, known for its antique shops and farmers market. Simple things, really, but after years of structuring my life around other people's needs and crises, they felt downright revolutionary. "Did you see the article in this morning's paper?" Maggie asked, settling at the table with her coffee. She unfolded the newspaper and tapped a small item in the local section. "Axel Patterson, 18, arrested for drunk driving, vehicle impounded." The article was only a few lines, but it told me everything I needed to know. I felt nothing. No urge to call, no impulse to rescue, no guilt for not stepping in, no sense of obligation to fix what he had broken. "You okay?" Maggie asked gently. She knew my story, why I had moved here, why I had cut off contact. I'm perfect, I said, and I meant it with complete honesty. It hadn't happened overnight. That first month after the confrontation was hard. There were times I nearly called Livia. I caught myself setting the table for 4 instead of 1. 66 years of conditioning doesn't just vanish, but over time the silence stopped feeling like abandonment and started feeling like peace. The absence of drama stopped feeling unnatural and started feeling normal. The ability to make decisions without bracing for someone else's reaction stopped feeling selfish and started feeling healthy. Yeah, any word from your daughter? Maggie asked as we got ready to head out. She stopped calling about 2 months ago, I said, slipping my purse over my shoulder. I think she finally realized I'm not going to change my mind. There had been a few last attempts at reconciliation. Livia had sent a birthday card in January for my 67th, with a long letter about how she understood now, how wrong they had been, how much they missed me, how they had learned their lesson. But between the lines were careful mentions of their ongoing financial problems, gentle suggestions that maybe I could help just a little while they got back on their feet. I threw it away without replying. Quentin tried a more aggressive tactic, turning up at my old house before discovering I'd sold it. The new owners gave him my lawyer's information, and Robert Chen informed him that any further attempts to contact me would be treated as harassment. Axel did nothing. No calls, no letters, no apology. In a strange way, his silence was the most honest of all. He had never really seen me as a person, only as a source of cash. Without that, I simply ceased to exist for him, and that was perfectly fine with me. Maggie and I drove through the countryside, past fields and trees just beginning to blush with autumn color. She talked about her grandchildren, real grandchildren who called just to tell her about their day, who visited because they wanted to, who drew her pictures at school and brought them over, then stayed for lunch just to be with her. You know what I realized? I said, watching the landscape roll by. As we pulled into the farmer's market parking lot, I said, I've spent so many years grieving the family I thought I had, I never gave myself the chance to build the life I actually wanted. And what did you want? Maggie asked. I thought about it while we wandered between the stalls, past heaps of fresh vegetables, jars of homemade jam, and tables of handcrafted jewelry. I wanted to matter to someone, I said, not because of what I could give them, but because of who I am. And do you matter to someone now? She asked. I looked around at the busy market, the vendors who greeted me by name and asked about my week, the regulars who had slowly turned into friendly acquaintances, and Maggie, who had welcomed me into her book club, her walking group, and her volunteer work at the animal shelter. Yes, I said, I matter to me. And it turns out, that's enough. We spent the late morning poking around antique shops, not hunting for anything specific, just enjoying the stories in old photographs, worn jewelry, and furniture that had outlived the families who once owned it. I bought a small wooden box that had once held someone's cherished letters and decided I'd use it to store the journal entries I'd written about this new chapter of my life. Over lunch at a little cafe, Maggie finally asked the question I knew would come sooner or later. Do you ever regret it? Cutting them off completely? I thought about it while I ate my soup and watched the people around us, couples reaching across the table to hold hands, families laughing together without forcing it, conversations that flowed easily instead of feeling staged, and people who genuinely seemed to enjoy being together. I regret that it had to come to that, I said at last. I regret that the people I loved most saw me primarily as a resource to drain. I regret all the years I spent justifying behavior I should never have tolerated. I paused, then added, but I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret choosing my own well-being over their comfort, and I don't regret finding out what my life feels like when it actually belongs to me. On the drive home, I told Maggie about the letter I'd received from the children's hospital the week before. They'd used part of my donation to build a new playroom in the pediatric ward. The envelope had included photos of sick children laughing and playing in a bright, cheerful space my money had helped create. That money is finally doing something beautiful, I said. It's bringing joy to children who desperately need it, instead of supporting entitled adults who absolutely don't. Your husband would be proud, Maggie said softly. I thought of Harold, of the man who loved me unconditionally for 44 years and never once made my worth dependent on the size of our bank account. If he could see me now, living in a quiet home filled with peace instead of obligation, surrounded by people who chose me rather than merely tolerated me, I knew he'd approve. That evening, I sat in my new favorite chair, reading a book I'd chosen simply because I wanted to, not because someone had recommended it or expected me to. My phone rang. For a second, my chest tightened, thinking it might be news from my family. But the caller ID showed the main office at Willowbrook Gardens. Dolores, this is Nancy from the community center, came the cheerful voice. We're still looking for someone to coordinate our holiday gift drive for the local women's shelter. Would you be interested? Since moving here, I'd been volunteering more and more, spending my time in ways that felt meaningful, not mandatory. The gift drive would mean organizing donations, coordinating with the shelter, and helping deliver gifts to women and children rebuilding their lives after leaving dangerous homes. Women who, like me, had learned that sometimes walking away from family was the bravest thing they could do. I'd love to help, I said. After I hung up, I walked over to the window and looked out at the small garden behind my cottage. It was nothing like the elaborate landscaping Harold and I had worked so hard on at the old house, but these flowers were mine. I had chosen them. I had planted them. I cared for them without anyone telling me I was doing too much for a woman my age. Tomorrow, I would start planning the gift drive. Next week, I'd take another day trip with Maggie, maybe to that art museum she keeps mentioning. Next month, I'd host Thanksgiving for my book club friends and start new traditions built on warmth and choice, not guilt and financial obligation. I had no idea what my biological family would be doing for the holidays. I didn't know whether Axel had learned anything from his DUI arrest, or whether Livia and Quentin had figured out how to manage their lives without my monthly deposits. I didn't know if they missed me, resented me, or had already found a new person to lean on. And for the first time in my life, I truly didn't care. I was 67 years old, and I was finally living for myself. I had friends who valued my thoughts, activities that energized me, and a future that felt open instead of suffocating. I thought back to Axel's cruel words that had set this whole journey in motion. The best birthday gift you could give me would be if you just died already so we could finally split the money. In a twisted way, he'd been right. The version of me who existed solely to serve their needs, who confused love with financial rescue, who accepted crumbs of affection in exchange for endless giving, that woman had died. And in her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable. Someone who had finally realized that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. Standing in my own kitchen, in my own home, surrounded by choices that were truly mine, I lifted my coffee mug in a quiet toast to the woman I'd become. "Happy birthday to me," I said into a room that felt fuller than any crowded family gathering ever had. And somewhere, I was sure Harold was smiling. "Now I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story," I said, turning back to the present. "What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through anything similar? Tell me in the comments below. And while you're here, on the final screen, I'll leave 2 more of the channel's favorite stories. I'm sure they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.